Fundación Libertad y Desarrollo presenta Razón de Estado con Dionisio Gutiérrez.
Cuando demos un vistazo a lo que hacen los mamarrachos capitostes que se dicen presidentes en un buen número de nuestros países y que no son más que trogloditas bravucones que abusan del poder, recordemos que a los dictadores no les bastan el miedo y la violencia para gobernar. Esas formas salvajes y autoritarias les son indispensables para alcanzar el poder y para mantenerlo un periodo de tiempo, pero la historia nos cuenta que a largo plazo fracasan. Lo que hay son excepciones. En América Latina, Cuba enarbola esa infamia y Nicaragua y Venezuela van por mal camino. La paradoja de los autócratas modernos que se remedan y se apoyan unos a otros es que se sienten obligados a crear la mentira o la ficción del respaldo popular. Los tiranos necesitan amontonar codependencia e idolatría para perpetuarse en el poder. Por eso vemos hoy a un creciente número de sociópatas adictos al poder, endeudando estados, quebrando economías, sometiendo pueblos y sacrificando el futuro de naciones enteras. En América Latina hay historias que duelen, pero si queremos salvar el futuro, debemos volver a la senda de las repúblicas de leyes, no de hombres. Las élites deben invertir en la construcción de democracias de instituciones sólidas e independientes, y la academia debe formar una nueva generación de tecnócratas y dirigentes políticos que estén a la altura de los tiempos. Con estas tareas hechas y con generosidad y solidaridad para quienes se han quedado atrás, debemos diseñar y ejecutar un modelo de desarrollo basado en las libertades civiles que facilitan la construcción de naciones exitosas, en la propiedad privada que incentiva la inversión y la creación de oportunidades, en el libre mercado y la competencia, y con el más riguroso respeto al Estado de Derecho para devolver a los latinoamericanos la dignidad que merecen. Estos son los desafíos a los que las generaciones de hoy debemos responder. Y para cumplir con nuestro destino, la batalla de nuestras vidas tiene como primera misión rescatar la política para restituirle el brillo, el honor y la decencia, conscientes de que esta misión solo podrá alcanzar la victoria con la presencia y el compromiso de los ciudadanos que respetan y valoran la democracia y la libertad. Hay espacio para el optimismo, pero tenemos tareas pendientes. La primera es expulsar del poder a los capitostes bravucones que por unas o por otras llegan al poder de los países y los confunden con sus fincas. ¿Cuándo empezamos?
El mundo vive momentos de alta incertidumbre y turbulencia. La guerra en Ucrania llega a su tercer año y el conflicto de Israel contra Hamás a su sexto mes. La libertad en el mundo retrocede por 18 años consecutivos y la economía más grande del mundo enfrenta una elección altamente disfuncional que podría poner a prueba su democracia de maneras no vistas en 150 años. A esto se suman otros riesgos importantes, incluida la rápida evolución de la inteligencia artificial sin una gobernanza adecuada, la alineación creciente entre Rusia, Irán y Corea del Norte, y los desafíos económicos persistentes en China. Para América Latina, los problemas se agravan por ser la región más violenta del mundo, en la que ocurren el 29% de los homicidios mundiales, pese a representar únicamente el 8% de la población mundial, y el crimen organizado es responsable por la mitad de esas muertes. Este año, el panorama electoral en Venezuela, Panamá y el principal país del norte ilustra los peligros de permitir que las decisiones de Estado estén dictadas por intereses electorales cortoplacistas, líderes populistas o autoritarios. La exclusión de María Corina Machado en Venezuela, las inciertas elecciones en Panamá en medio de desafíos económicos y sociales, y la posibilidad de un cambio de administración en la Casa Blanca son claros ejemplos de cómo la falta de atención a los principios democráticos y la racionalidad en las políticas públicas pueden desviar a las naciones de su curso. Ante este escenario, la contribución de los tanques de pensamiento y grupos cívicos es indispensable. Instituciones como Freedom House y el Bush Institute con las cuales Dionisio Gutiérrez, presidente de la Fundación Libertad y Desarrollo y titular de Razón de Estado, está profundamente involucrado como parte de sus consejos. Son cruciales en el análisis, la reflexión y la generación de políticas públicas que buscan fortalecer la democracia y promover la libertad en el mundo. Estas organizaciones juegan un papel vital al favorecer perspectivas informadas y estrategias concretas para enfrentar tanto los desafíos globales como regionales. En momentos en que los valores democráticos están bajo asedio, su labor en la promoción de la libertad y el fortalecimiento de las instituciones democráticas es más crucial que nunca. El papel de los tanques de pensamiento en la formulación de políticas públicas basadas en la racionalidad es crucial, especialmente cuando el populismo y el autoritarismo amenazan con socavar los valores del Estado de Derecho y la democracia liberal. La respuesta a la creciente influencia del populismo de izquierda en América Latina, ejemplificada por los regímenes de Venezuela, Nicaragua y Bolivia, encuentra eco en la formación del Grupo Libertad y Democracia bajo la presidencia de Iván Duque. Esta alianza de líderes, comprometidos con los ideales de libertad, democracia y justicia, refleja un esfuerzo concertado por parte de figuras influyentes en el escenario iberoamericano para defender estos valores fundamentales. La misión de recuperar la sensatez política se vuelve impostergable. Es hora de que los líderes políticos respondan al llamado, orientando su brújula por la sabiduría y el compromiso de instituciones como estas.
We're living times in which we feel that we're living dangerous times. Democracy, freedom, and human rights are being threatened all over the world because criminal organizations, corrupt governments, and tyrants in the dictators that we have left in the world are becoming a more dangerous threat to all the free world and the countries that are still fighting for their democracy and their freedom. To speak about these issues, I have the privilege of presenting to you Mr. Michael Chertoff. He served as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from 2005 to 2009. He was a federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit and headed the criminal division at the U.S. Department of Justice. He co-founded the Chertoff Group and serves as its executive chairman, focusing on security and business strategy. Secretary Chertoff, welcome to Guatemala and to Latin America, and welcome to Razón de Estado. You're focusing now, after all the experience that you have after being such an important judge and the Secretary of Homeland Security, in technology, security, and how it is affecting democracy and human rights. What is your diagnosis in this world that is going through such rough times?
Well, I think in part the technology has challenged our traditional understanding of the roles and responsibilities of government and individuals. In particular, we're beginning to see the real explosion in what we call disinformation, which is the use of technology in order to create real illusions that can mislead people about what the facts are. Also, we're finding with artificial intelligence, algorithms have been developed that allow political actors to target individuals based on their personal interests and personal anxieties in a way that's very manipulative. So what we're seeing is that information and the information space has become a domain in which political operatives can try to manipulate voters and undermine trust in the political system.
Yes, and which role is or are playing, governments like the Chinese or the Russian that, we hear a lot of things, but tell us what you know about them.
Well, the Russians, have always been believers in propaganda. If you go back 100 years, what has changed is the technology has given them a tremendous ability to amplify the scope of what they do. So part of what they do is they will impersonate people online so that you may be thinking you're getting a message from your friend when it's really somebody sitting in St. Petersburg. They use the technology to increase the scale of their propaganda, but again, to tailor it to the individual audiences that they're dealing with. We saw that with Cambridge Analytica back in 2016. And they're also using the technology as a way of simply creating distrust. Because if at some point you're not sure whether something is true or not, you may wind up not believing anything. And in that environment, what winds up happening is you tend to be directed by what you hope to believe and not what the facts are.
With the experience that you have, Mr. Secretary, how would you compare what you have seen throughout your professional life, being so close to very important positions, and what's going on in today's world? Are you more worried today than you were decades ago?
I'm more worried today about whether we've lost the trust, which is the foundation of democracy. If you think about what democracy is based upon, among other things, it's based on the idea of truth. We can know what's a fact. And also whether we trust people to try to do the right thing. Even if they're not perfect, we trust the process in the government. But in a world where that's undermined, particularly using technology, then people wind up being directed by their emotions or by their fears. And if I look at what the enemies of democracy do, is they use fear and anxiety and identity issues as a way of manipulating people and tapping into their fear and their hatred, and that's how you begin to undermine democracy and create internal strife.
Yes. How important it is for the people of the world to develop critical thinking in order to be able to interact with all this technology and misinformation.
Critical thinking is the key to avoiding being manipulated. If you have critical thinking, you look at a message that's being disseminated and you ask yourself, who is doing it? Why are they doing it? Does this key into something that's going on in the world now that suggests it's being done deliberately in order to manipulate you? Without critical thinking, you simply take things at face value and you believe what you might want to believe or what your fears impel you to believe, and that plays into the hands of people who want to undermine democracy and solidarity.
Yes. We have lived through cycles, throughout history, and definitely we're going now through a rough cycle where, threats and problems are right there, How optimistic could you say that you are that in 10 or 15 years we are going to have learned and been able to, go to the next cycle in a much stronger and better position?
We've had challenges to our solidarity and our democracy and our love of freedom before. We had it in the 30s. In the 60s, to some degree, we had it with terrorism, and we've come out of them. So on the one hand, I say to myself, well, history is like a series of cycles. We've cycled out of them. But the truth is, it doesn't operate automatically. It requires people to commit themselves in a way that will foster democracy. So I don't want people to walk away and say, well, this will change in 15 years, I just have to hold my breath. Yes. I want people to understand that things will change and get better if we make it happen, and that means everybody has to be engaged. They have to vote, they have to speak the truth, they have to be willing to support people who stand for values of freedom and democracy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we definitely need a statesman like you, keeping on telling us these things and being so close to the security system still today, and with your experience and being part of Freedom House, we definitely need you around. So thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
And we'll stay in touch.
Good.
Thank you to you too. We'll be back in a second. There are regions in our world that are seeing more and more authoritarian governments going after activists, members of the media, and even political people in the political opposition. And to confront these and to fix these kind of situations that are deteriorating our democracies and our institutions, we need a strong leadership. We need intellectuals and brave statesmen and stateswomen that really know how to confront these kind of situations. For this, I have the privilege of presenting Nicole Bivins Secada. She is the Executive Vice President at Freedom House and the Kelly and David File Fellow at the George W. Bush Institute in Dallas. She oversees the organization's strategy and program implementation. She served in the U.S. Department of State, focusing on democracy, human rights, and counterterrorism. She has significant experience in both the public and NGO sectors, including work and local governance and democratization in Ecuador. Nicole, welcome to the region, this region of Latin America, a very complicated region, and welcome to Razón de Estado. You have been doing a lot, for our part of the world. You are very active in Freedom House and the Bush Institute, but we still need much more. What else could these amazing organizations like Freedom House and the Bush Institute could do to help us, not only protect, but motivate our activists, people in the media that are exposing corruption, that are confronting drug trafficking and all the ugly things that we are seeing in Latin America?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the first thing we can do is raise our voice. There's so much progress being made. Guatemala is a great and wonderful case of that. I'm very optimistic about what's going on here. But there are places where corruption is endemic. There are places where human rights activists are being thrown in jail every day. We have to raise our voice to just talk about what that problem is. We also have to mobilize the US government, regional governments, the EU, to really take serious their role in supporting local activists, democratically oriented politicians, and we need to support the activists and the reforming politicians. They deserve our support, whether that's financial support or rhetorical support, but we have a big responsibility to stand with those people who are courageously fighting for democracy.
Examples, horrible cases that we're seeing is, the assassination of Navalny, because that's what it was in Russia. What the dictatorship in Caracas is doing against Maria Corina Machado, the presidential candidate. The editor of one of the most important newspapers in Guatemala, Jose Rubén Zamora, is still in jail. And there are so many other cases of authoritarian and extremely corrupt governments going after these kind of people. How can we help them?
Yeah, I will say the trends you're talking about are very serious, and we see them in every country. Dictators are not unique. They are putting people in jail. They are silencing them. They're using what they consider to be laws to try and silence or pressure people to leave their countries, to flee, or to silence themselves. What we need to do in the international community, and certainly organizations like Freedom House and the Bush Institute, we have to call out that behavior and to say we will only recognize elections. We will only recognize leaders if they come to power democratically. We can't normalize people being thrown in jail and in many cases being murdered. Additionally, I would say right now we also have a phenomenon where dictators are going after their opponents outside of their countries. It's not just what they do at home. There's transnational repression in which they are going after, they are poisoning, threatening, online harassing, and sometimes killing people in other countries, including in democracies like the United States.
Not recognizing these people, these groups, criminals and authoritarian, or even putting sanctions, it looks like they are not, functioning. They are not giving us the results that we want in order to improve democracies and rule of law. So what else could we do?
We have to implement the sanctions. Quite often countries are putting sanctions on, but they're letting loopholes and letting people get around the sanctions. I think we need to be true to our word. Once a sanction is there, we need to do everything to ensure that it's implemented fully.
Okay. Navalny's case in Russia, it's a grave situation because the level of impunity, which with not only Putin but these other people in Latin America, these authoritarian, corrupt, presidents or former presidents, they do whatever they want, and there must be a way to stop them.
Mm-hmm. We have to find what their source of funding is. So many of them are being supported by other dictators or being supported by narco traffickers or by criminal gangs. There are ways to choke off those forms of financial support. We also have to realize that we should have relations between democratic governments and other democratic governments. There are presidents like President Arevalo and others who have fought really hard to be elected by their people and are representing their people. We can't treat leaders who have gone through that process and are representing people the same as someone who came to power through corruption and fraud and force. And so what we have to say is, let's not welcome those people
Yes.
and treat them like heads of
Exactly.
states in the exact same way.
Nicole, in the seconds that we have left, the Bush Institute and Freedom House, you have been invested and very busy with all the issues around the world that are, important, grave, and you've done an amazing work where there is a level of disconnection with Latin America. What can we expect from Freedom House and the Bush Institute to this part of the world in the near future?
I think that we are realizing that we can no longer be as quiet as many places have been. Latin America has a great deal of success stories and a lot of challenges, and particularly organizations in the United States. These are our neighbors. We have to be supportive. We have to be looking at those great stories where there's democratic hope, and we have to recognize that we have to be investing in those countries that are really on the front edge of democracy and really trying to pressure those governments in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other places where democracy is really, really under pressure.
Okay. As far as we have, amazing women like you that are so compromised and, taking charge and trying to help us, fixing this, we're in good shape. So, Nicole, thank you very much. Let's stay in touch and hoping to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time. This is Razón de Estado.